PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And on this episode, I have John Olsen. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing, Adam?
Good. I'm glad to have you on. It's another perspective into the paranormal. It's where I'm digging.
Awesome. It's good to be here. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. So tell us about your background and what got you involved with it.
So I grew up in a house that was over 100 years old. It was built in 1883. And by the time I was about 8 years old or so, I realized that there were things going on in my house that didn't happen at my friend's house. It was actually very paranormally active. And for a lot of time, when I was younger, my parents wouldn't let us talk outside of the home about the things that were going on. The footsteps, the apparitions. I mean, there was all kinds of things that were going on. And so I did a lot of studying when I was younger about the paranormal. It got me really interested in it. And then once I was a teenager and a little bit older, and some of my friends found out about my paranormal experiences, they had me telling stories at parties and on double dates. And before long, the word got out and I had people coming to me with their stories. So by the time I was 17, 18, I was interviewing people locally and getting their paranormal stories. And it just kind of spread. And eventually, after I published my first book, it spread a little bit further and I got my own website. And since then, I've been having a lot of people contact me. I just released my fifth book. And so it's just grown from there.
So it's helpful for you to have experience because when you're interviewing people, I'm sure that builds comfort for them, right?
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing at the beginning. When I first started interviewing people, they would hear me talking about my experience, and I think they felt safe coming to me because of that and relating their story. And so, yeah, definitely having experienced the paranormal has helped people to feel open to sharing their story with me.
And you have books written, correct?
Yeah, I've got 5 books now. It's the Stranger Bridgerland book series. I named the first one Stranger Bridgerland because I'm from northern Utah, and northern part of Utah and part of Idaho and part of Wyoming is called Bridgerland. It's kind of an unofficial official title for that area because it was originally explored by Jim Bridger, who was a trapper in the area, and because of that, it's kind of stuck with Bridgerland, and because of that, I named my first book Stranger Bridgerland, and then the book series, the Stranger Bridgerland book series.
All right, I mean, I like the name, right? It gives it character.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of, and it's a good starter too for somebody that's not from the area, and they're like, "What is Bridgerland?" And then I'm able to kind of explain it and get into it. I really like the name personally. So.
Yeah, I do too. Cause it, like you said, it gives it that conversation opener. It's an icebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
Yeah, then as people get to learn more about you, you become relatable to them as they're in your approach, and it makes it easier for them to speak of the issue.
Right, exactly. And especially early on when I started this, it's been almost 30 years ago now, there wasn't the openness that there is now. Now we have television shows and YouTube channels and everything that's, designed towards the paranormal, and which has been great because people feel more comfortable sharing their stories. But originally it was so taboo that people were afraid to share their stories to begin with. So
Yeah, I do a lot of off podcast interviews, and when I made that known, the amount of email I receive daily is insane. It's crazy.
Right.
And I'm one of those. I don't doubt anything. I don't believe, and I say this very often, I don't believe any information is bad information. You just got to filter correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And in the time that I've been doing this, I've interviewed people and there's been a few stories. Well, there's stories where it seems really out there and kind of on the edge. But as I interview people and I hear the fear in their voice, and I get to talk to them and I kind of put aside my bias because, a lot of people wouldn't believe my story either. And it's, ghost story. It's seeing, ghosts, which is even more acceptable than some of the other stuff, Bigfoot or UFO or
Right.
whatever it is. And so, it's just great to be able to interview people.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people again off podcasts, and for everything, paranormal, UFOs, health and wellness. There's a variety on the show, right? But
Hmm.
in the UFO community, more than one occasion, I'd have someone, they'd reach out by email, and I'd call them and we talk. And it's funny because one guy's like, "Well, I don't know, are you in the CIA?" And he was accusing me of being in the CIA. I was like, "No." It was
Right.
the first time for everything, but that was, and he got really standoffish when I answered him. I was like, "No," like he's like, "Are you sure?" So I had to terminate that call as well. But
Right. Exactly.
for you, in your investigations, are you? And I ask this of everyone I talk to in the paranormal because everyone's kind of unique in their own way. Uh, Don and Laney is another couple I've spoken to, really good, and they have a very unique approach in some of the equipment. What equipment are you using when you're researching?
So with me, I do go out with. There's a few local groups that I'll go investigate with, and throughout my time, there's been times when I've had to go out and help somebody who contacted me and said, I think my house is haunted or something of that nature. But the vast majority of what I do is just, interview people about the experience that they've had. If it's close enough, I'll, hop in my truck, I'll go to that area, I'll try and get a feel for it, and just kind of, gather, my feelings about the area and stuff like that. I don't do a lot of going out and investigating. Like I said, I do on occasion with some of the local groups. But most of what I do is just interview people and get their story and then write it first person. And that's the kind of investigating that I do.
Well, it's good because it's collecting information, and that's the best way to build a network. And like for me, eventually going to go out and do a documentary, and people like yourself and like again like Don and Laney from Spectral Waves, I'm going to be communicating with you guys of where to go because I'm going to go to the spots, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
and even if I go and look, I'm not going to make things great. I'm not going to sensationalize anything. If I go and it's boring, it's boring. If sorry for those who are watching, if the documentary is boring, oh well. But I want to go find what I can, and it's going to anywhere from UFOs to ghosts, Bigfoot. Not sure that requires. And I had this conversation. You're out in the woods. I'm not a woodsy guy. I don't know. I'd have to find a team for that. But as far
Right.
as the paranormal, I got involved with this because I've never witnessed anything, and I really want to witness something.
Mhm.
And I'm a strange person. You'll find, like again, if I'm in a dark house and there's bumping at night, I go investigate, look for a talk, and I get it's disappointing. So I maybe that's what it is. And I had this conversation with my brother. Maybe it's that they know, and they're just gonna be, and they don't want to be bothered, right? Right.
Right.
This guy's a jerk. I don't want shit to do with him. So
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, but that's good. I mean, great for you though, because I mean, it piques your interest, and I know that happens with a lot of people. It's that almost primordial feeling inside of us that we want to go and research the unknown and figure it out. It's really fascinating and great, and especially for somebody in your situation who may not have necessarily had that experience yet, but you're really searching for it.
yeah, and it's unfortunate because pop culture's damaged the ability to investigate ghosts horribly.
Yeah, yeah, it has. It's interesting because my it's certain people out there that do on television and stuff. They do a lot of good work, but like my inbox is filled with dust of videos because of it, and certain things like that where you try and explain to somebody, well, that's actually dust, and to somebody that might think, oh, that's a spirit. It's you don't want to dampen their spirit, but you also it can get very tedious to filter through all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
and you got these master hoaxers out there, right, with digital
Yeah.
equipment and software. I've been fooled by a lot of stuff. I mean, and a lot of that's because I want to see, and that happens to anyone. If you want to go find an alien and you're in a dark place, your mind's going to fix it. You're going to think you're seeing, no matter what you see, it's an alien. Period. Right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, yep. And when you go out with different groups and stuff, I mentioned this last weekend I was speaking at a conference, and there was quite a few paranormal experts there, and one of them made this mention that I've been out with UFO groups that are looking for it, UFOs, but to some of them, every single airplane in the air is a UFO, and it
Yeah.
can get really frustrating for people who are, like you, wanting to have a genuine experience, and you want to debunk everything, even though you want that experience. It can be frustrating for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to have Douglas Wilson on soon from MUFON. He's an investigator of UFOs, and he's meticulous, right?
Yeah.
He's got his craft down, and he's in the know, and he's knowledgeable, and he's not one of those guys that's completely over the fence on it. He's really centered, and it gives him a good perspective.
Right.
And there's like Steve Murrah. He's a paranormal specialist. I just spoke to him. I just had him on podcast not recently. He's from England. He's on point. Like, his perspective's pretty strong, and he's got, like you, years under the belt, seen some weird things. He's investigated all things. He's come across the nonsense too, but he, like you and me, you have to filter. You have to know how to filter, and you can't berate anyone or belittle anyone, because you never know. Again, no information's bad information. You just got to filter right.
Yeah, exactly. And when you go, when I've had people come to me and they think, oh, I think my house is haunted, and I go over and interview them, and we look around, and we do kind of an overview of what they're hearing and stuff. And honestly, I would say 50% of the time, maybe even a little bit more than that, you can check off and say, okay, it's actually not paranormal, but this is what's going on. And for a lot of people, that's a relief. And then for some people, they're like, I really felt like it was paranormal, and they're a little bummed. But you've got to be honest in what you're doing, and honest with people when you're dealing with them. But you do have to do, like I say, very soft-handed sometimes, because when somebody gets excited and shows you a video, and it's dust, or it's a lens flare or something, you want to be able to tell them that, but in a way that you're not, oh, you're so stupid or whatever.
Yeah,
you don't want to be,
you don't want to go to the kid like, look, there's no Santa. You'll kill him, right? That's something you got to work your way into.
Yep, exactly. And that's, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I remember as a kid, the Fox television show did a whole series,
right,
where they debunked magic and showed how the tricks were done.
Oh yeah, I remember that. The guy with the mask.
Yeah, and
I do remember
walked away
that.
from that so disappointed.
Yeah,
I was
same.
so bummed. To see behind the curtain was just a horrible thing for me, because we want to know the truth, and then at the same time, there's a magic to it that we don't want to lose.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you why. It's the mystery. There's something very appealing about mystery, and it's for all of us, right? Whether it be a show or a real phenomena. I worry that I go out, I see ghosts, and it becomes common. And it's like, all right, great, you're here. You're done. I don't want to get to that point. I want it to be interesting and learn more. But I guess the chase of the mystery is what makes it more appealing. And then there's the other half, though. And this is a big one. I'm going to ask you this question, and it's the one I have written down. It's the one I get emailed the most. In your opinion, from your years of experience, what happens to us when we die?
Well, and what's really interesting is everybody's got kind of a centered belief system, depending upon how you were raised and what you've learned, and all of everything like that.
Right.
My belief is that when we die, we enter another realm or whatever, but in a way we share the same space, but it's almost a different wavelength, and there are times when they come through and we see ghosts. I know that with everybody that I interviewed and the experiences that I've had, I believe there are residual hauntings where almost like it's a pathway that somebody has walked over and over again, and somehow it gets recorded and it gets played over again. And then you also have interactive ghosts and hauntings, where it seems to be a spirit who's used to be alive but is dead now, and somehow is able to interact with people on occasions. And then I also believe that there are entities out there that which you would call inhuman, that are much darker. They were never actually a living person, but somehow they're much darker, evil, more evil spirit. But I believe that when we die, we go over to this other realm, and you know, we our energy passes over into this realm, and then at some point, who knows what happens, because we don't necessarily see dinosaur ghosts a lot. So it's amazing that something happens in between there. But that's just my belief, is
Right.
that when we die,
Well,
we're energy, and the energy has to go somewhere.
you're not far off. So I've interviewed on podcasts, a lot of on and off podcasts, a lot of experts, or, not all of them are going to call themselves experts. With respect, in my opinion, they are, because they know a lot more than me. But you're not far off on as far as what you're saying. And as far as the darker energies or creatures, I had this revelation of a theory, and I'll thank Graham Hancock, because you think about how old the planet is, billions of years old, and how many life forms, whether it be humanoid or otherwise, that had lived here prior to us and had perished. And if their energy is hanging around, yeah, they're a dark energy. Like we're alive, we're running around, we're doing stuff, we're playing with our phones. They're mad because they can't do it. They're jealous. Right?
Exactly.
So we don't know what lived here. If you go back 2 million years, let's say we had a building 2 million years ago built, right? In 2 million years, it's gone. There's no trace of that. It's in the sands of time. But the energy of these beings would still be around in theory, right?
Right.
So I make room for that. That was just recently. I'd spoken to a couple of afterlife people, and they hit me like, my goodness, this planet's very old. And if you listen to Graham Hancock, which I've gotten into in the last 6 months, that guy's taking you to a whole new place. It makes you rethink the history of mankind entirely.
Yeah,
So,
and it's interesting to think, if you take the whole history of the Earth, and it was a 24-hour period, man only shows up in the last 2 minutes or something like that,
Right.
or last 30 seconds of that 24-hour period. So there's a lot that's gone on before, and a lot of energy. I'm a big believer in the energy, and whether that's, I give this example to a lot of people, and some people understand this and some people don't, because they might be a little bit more sensitive to it. But I said, have you ever walked into a room where there's people and you didn't see anything, but you all of a sudden know that there's just been an argument in this room?
yeah, I agree.
Anyway, sorry, I was just going to say, and they're like, oh yeah, I've had that experience. And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about with energy, that there's no way there was an argument or a fight, but that energy is left there. And that's how I kind of explain that to people.
Yeah, some people want to argue that you're looking at body language, but that's not. You could definitely walk in a room full of tension and feel it. It's undeniable. Whatever instinct is bringing that to be, it's definitely a force of energy. If you consider what it is that we, in our bodies, even our brain, it's a computer, right? So
Right.
I always imagine a ghost, and I'm not taking issue with people's description of ghosts, because I don't know. I don't know enough to say anything about otherwise. And even if I did, I'm not going to discount, because there's still the potential that I don't know that. There's always going to be some, like in science, everything that we know to a fact is later unproved. It's disproven, or it's improved upon.
Right, exactly.
So there's one video, I reference this a lot. It's the one video I've seen where this guy, it's broad daylight. He goes in his house, he has a cell phone. I don't remember what led up to it, but he's recording, and there's this thing upside down in the doorway. And that ruined me for the whole day. Because
Right.
you could see the fear in his eyes, and you could see the adrenaline dump. That's another thing too. I watch these videos, and I notice these people, I'm not going to call out particular YouTubers, but I'm watching these videos and I don't see the adrenaline dump. I'm a pretty tough dude. I'm very fearless. Trust me when I say this. And I will dump adrenaline. If something like that happens, I'm shaking a little bit because my adrenaline's going to run.
Right.
But that guy I'm talking about in the video, his adrenaline, you could see it in his camera shake, in his voice, in his breathing, his eyes. And when I captured the image of the thing, whatever it was, do you know what I'm talking about? It's in a doorway upside down by, like, I want to say a bathroom doorway.
I think I know what you're talking about. I believe it's a gentleman who's had several experiences with this dark shape in his house, and he's filmed it several times. And he's scared to take. He does have that adrenaline and fear in their voice.
Yeah, you can see it in him.
Comes across it.
Listen,
exactly.
It scared the shit out of me. Look, I can handle a ghost. If a ghost comes in the house right now, your average run-of-the-mill ghost, I can handle a lot.
Hmm.
right? I mean, what can you do? You can't fight it. You're not going to throw a punch at it. But
Right.
that video, the way that thing was and the way it looked in the image, and I have all these filters and these programs on my computer. I could not scramble that to find any kind of fraudulence there. That scared me to death. I haven't even looked at that
Yeah.
image since I investigated it like 3 months ago.
Hmm.
So,
And it's interesting when when I interview people and stuff like that. That's kind of what I'm talking about too, because I can interview somebody and I get the feeling just because of the way they talk about it or the way they've gone through it, and I get more of a sense of do they believe what they saw, or are they getting that, am I getting from that sense from them? Because it's interesting how many times I'll interview somebody and I'm taking them back to this incident, and they will have, they'll re-experience the fear to a certain extent or the excitement to a certain extent, and it really solidifies to me that they're telling me what they really saw.
yeah, that's like I had an off-air interview with a physician, a doctor, ER. I think he was an ER doctor or surgeon, one or the other. I think it was a surgeon. He was So regardless,
Hmm.
there's this building adjacent to the hospital where they do their training for, I guess, new medical staff. And,
Yeah.
he came off air and he heard the episode. I think it was with Steve Murr. I don't remember which one it was, but he reached out. I emailed him, we emailed back. I called him, and he had expressed to me that what he saw wasn't like scary. He was in the room, and in his peripheral vision, he saw what he thought was someone standing there. And while he was looking down at whatever book or manual he's looking at, he's like, "Well, should you be here right now? You have ID." Looked over, and no one was there. And it freaked. And this is, I think, in the '90s, if I recall. I'm going to have to write this down for the future when I tell people. I'm obviously never going to give his name. I protect people's identities. I respectfully understand that.
Right.
But by what he said by that, it wasn't like a frightening experience, but it was enough to shake him and his
Yeah.
belief system, right? Because I think most people they don't have a belief system. Like I'm not sure which one that would be, agnostic or otherwise, or
Hmm.
when something happens like that, how do you react? You know what I mean? It's changing.
Right. And for a lot of people, it kind of changes their life. I know I've interviewed a lot of people who've had, Bigfoot sightings, and it changes their life. It's almost like an adrenaline rush that they chase the rest of their life trying to get that again and see that again. And because, one minute you're a normal person in the woods, doing your thing, and then there's a mythical creature that you didn't even believe existed
Yeah.
is suddenly facing you. People go through life changing situations because of the paranormal.
Yeah, I'm one of these people. Like, not that I of course I love Ghostbusters, but I'm always
Mhm.
wondering, where's the technology where we could just find these things? You know what I mean? And even
Yeah.
more, catch one, right?
Right.
Because for me,
Exactly.
if I'm out in the woods and Bigfoot's there, and sorry to those who are listening, and I have a gun, I don't know, like I'm not going to sound crazy. I'm coming back with proof. You know what I mean? So,
Right, and there's a lot of people that are like that too. That it's actually surprising the number of people I know that carry a gun because of that very reason.
yeah,
And then there's a lot of people that I know too that are very anti that. It's kind of a back and forth thing, but yeah, I can totally understand that.
yeah, because for ghosts, and I said this before, I can imagine the worst case scenario for me if it's in my house and it's like it picks like some awful song to repeat over and over again, right? Because you can't that would literally push you to insanity.
Right,
You know?
that is that. It reminds me of back in the day. I'm sorry, this is kind of off subject, but
Sure.
Paul Simon was on Saturday Night Live, and he walks into an elevator. He sold his soul to be famous, and he gets on the elevator, and the devil shows up, and he says, "I'm ready to go to hell," and he goes, "Oh no, you're here," because that was his hell, was listening to the elevator music of his music for the rest of his life. So
Exactly. The torture, that
that's what you're
reputation.
right. I think that's what you're talking about. So.
So when you encounter a family that reaches out or someone like that, where there's these hauntings that are unpleasant, what,
Mhm.
and I ask this to a lot of people, some tend to not want to deal with it, and others have other methods. What's a protocol to remove an unwanted spirit from someone's house?
So what I usually do, and I have to say, in all of my time, it's been very rare that it's been a situation where whatever it is needed to be removed, or the family felt that way. I go to um, I talk to the family about whatever their background is, religious background, because in my experience, if, for example, you have a Catholic family that's having a problem, you're not going to bring in a Native American shaman to clean their house, because it's not based on their belief system. What really has to be what has to be helpful is whatever their belief system is, to use that. In the same way you wouldn't want to use a Catholic priest in a Protestant family that's having a problem. And most religious I guess sects, whatever you want to call them, have their own way of taking care or cleansing a house.
Right.
So it's important to go by, whatever it is they believe. And some families, especially now in this day and age, they don't have a religious background. So you may want, talk to them about bringing in somebody who can cleanse their house with sage or something like that, something that they can be a part of and feel like. The biggest thing that I find that's important is that they take responsibility of letting whatever it is know that this is my home, and you are not welcome here. You can bring in religious, whatever their religious, beliefs are, their priest or their bishop, whatever it is, to help, but it's important for them to take control of the situation for it to last, if that makes sense.
Yeah, here's my imagination playing a role on me. I always imagine, and I was just talking about, I imagine like a table full of all the different religious heads from all these different cultures. Like, all right, man, we got to deal with this shit. We need a book. Let's get the book written already.
Right.
And I've thought of that too over time. There's a lot of religions, and how do they all? So I guess that's a good answer, depending on your belief system. And I'm sure they all have like some kind of protocol. But for me, and this is a challenge of science. Come on, if spirits are energy, right? Mostly energy, which from what I understand, they are. There's got to be something out there that could counter them, right? Frequencies or something, because they have things now where you can put like these little high-pitched sound wave things out, and it keeps roaches away. I don't understand how it works, but I know it exists, you know? So I wonder if the same can be said for them, because there's got to be some physics they have to abide by, right?
Right. You would think that would be it. And there's certain rules. I don't want to call them rules, but speaking with other paranormal investigators and things like that, there's a belief that running water has energy, and certain rock formations have energy that can magnify a spirit's ability to do things. So that's right along those lines. You think if those things are able to enhance it, there's got to be something that might dampen it too. Who knows? That's an interesting point, though.
Yeah, think about like sound waves. Like I had a sinus infection, and I get them pretty frequently because that's the unfortunate path I have. But for those that get sinus problems and inner ear problems, you could hear sounds that you typically wouldn't pick up, and it's ear piercing, right?
Right.
So, I mean, if they're operating on a level where it's frequency, we'd have to figure out some way to both torture dogs, people with sinus infections, and ghosts. You know what I mean? So
yeah, exactly. Yep, that would make sense. You might be onto something there. So
I'm hoping. See, again, I'd say this to everyone, whether it be UFO or ghosts. I don't speak from science. I speak from childhood imagination, curiosity, and I constantly want to think of something. Like there's got to be something.
Yeah. And that's how some of the greatest things have been invented. So you never know. So
yeah, I've had people try to argue me about some of the things I'm speaking about that I know, and they're like trying to challenge me with science. I'm like, you realize you're trying to argue with me with science on theory from childhood curiosity.
Right. Yep. And there's been a lot of times when I've talked to people, or I've interviewed on different podcasts, and they want to argue or something like that. And I have a hard time putting my energy towards arguing with somebody. Yeah, you know what I mean?
I hear a lot of those. And that's why the format of my podcast, it's like sitting over coffee.
Right.
I'm not really I don't want to entertain debate. I mean, the skeptics, when they listen, by all means, those are the few I'm going to argue with. Because it's fun, and I know it's going to make them crazy. Because, again, they're using science to challenge curiosity, and curiosity doesn't care,
Yeah, exactly.
If at the end of the day I go out and I research what I'm researching and I find nothing and I'm dead wrong, oh, well, it didn't ruin my life, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think for me, again, with Ghost, it catches my attention mostly because it's a big question. What happens to us when we go? Where do we, heaven, hell, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know. Still, I don't know. I hear really valid points from some of the afterlife people and some of the paranormals. I mean, really, so much so that I feel a little bit better about some of the questions I had prior to.
Right.
For you, what cases have you worked, like you for yourself at somewhere, and you came into contact with something, no doubt it's an apparition or something?
Well, I guess the biggest one for me was the house that I grew up in.
Right.
And the one that, my parents still live there. So even to today, they have experiences. My kids who've, spent time at grandma and grandpa's, they've had experiences of their own. And so, that's where, my biggest experiences have been. Some of my, favorite stories of interviewing people. It's interesting how many I get that come from the wilderness for whatever reason. Somebody who's in the wilderness and people talk about the shadow people that they see all the time, which also goes along with that video, like you were mentioning before.
I got a story about that for you in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, and one thing that fascinates me is that a lot of the people that I interview who run into these shadow entities in the wilderness, they're bigger for some reason. A lot of times, when people talk about them in their house or they run into them, in the city or whatever it is, they're roughly human size. But I've interviewed people who've run into them that up to, like, one time there was one that's called the Watchers. There's a mountain range in the Wind Rivers, which is in Wyoming. And I interviewed a guy who, when he was a teenager, him and his buddies were camping up there. And 3 of these creatures, or whatever they were, stood on the ridge, dark outlines, huge shadow people that were like 20 feet tall that watched them all the way till dark. When the sun finally went down and it got dark and they disappeared, but they were enormous. And that's one thing that surprises me is the people who talk about them in the wilderness, how large they are, so much bigger. And I kind of wonder if they're not, like we talked about before, more of a old,
like something that existed prior to mankind, billions of years old.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're telling me this, here again, my imagination, not science, says, why do they vary in size from city to wilderness? I mean, some people would say, oh, it's their mind playing tricks on them, et cetera, et cetera. But bear in mind, like fish, bigger fish go to bigger bodies of water to thrive. Right. So these entities, if they're larger, it makes no sense for them to be in a populated city area. One, we don't know what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. We have no clue. You know what I mean? Maybe they want to be out in the woods, or maybe they want to be out in Wyoming and relax. We don't know. I mean, what is it going to be like when you pass away and you're one of those other ghost hunters that are constantly beating doors down looking for them? Like, look, man, why were you bothering me so much? I'm just trying to look at a lake and you're giving me grief, for hell's sake,
Right.
So,
and it's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of times, when I've had somebody come to me and they're like, oh, I think my house is haunted, and I go in and I talk to them and I explain that if it's just what you might call a ghost, somebody who used to be alive but isn't anymore, I try and explain it to them that, it's just like meeting 10 people on the street. 9 out of 10 are going to be decent people. Yeah. It's that 10th person that's a jerk that you really got to look for. Because in my opinion, if you're a jerk in life, you're going to be a jerk in the afterlife as well. That might not change.
So I tell my relatives when I go, I feel bad for all of you. I'm going to harass you. It's the truth too. You're right. While you're in the room staring at the supposed scary ghost, a human being will kill you in a heartbeat.
Right. It's not the dead. It's not the dead that worry me. It's the living. And I'm not the first one to say that.
It's just a fact, Yeah. I as a kid, I'd see these programs, and I see them even recently, where they're looking for Bigfoot, and they're pounding on trees and are yelping or yelling or whatever they're doing. And I always pictured a Bigfoot sitting down somewhere with his, like, I guess his other Bigfoot. Like, what the hell are these people doing, man? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I always kind of wonder that myself as well. With that, because with everything else in the forest, if you go out and yell and scream and knock on things, you're driving everything away from you. Why would it be any different?
Yeah, you're
But,
letting them know. There they are. Let's go this way.
yep,
Exactly. That's a good point. Look,
yeah, yep,
I don't discredit Bigfoot. It's just
mhm.
for me, because of its size or alleged size, and knowing that we found a chipmunk that was endangered some time ago with drones. I don't know. It's hard, you know.
Right, it is. Yeah, it's interesting, and the more I learn about Bigfoot, and the more I hear people, I have not personally had a Bigfoot experience. I would love to.
Same.
That I would absolutely love to. And growing up, I grew up in a very rural area, so when a lot of kids were skipping school to go to the mall, I skipped school to go hiking and fishing and hunting. And I spent just forever as a kid and, as a young adult in the mountains. So I've been up there, I know, but it's just that kind of fascinates me. And because of this, I study a lot of folklore too, because of, just because of the background. I think it marries in with the paranormal really well. And I know that in Native American folklore, they consider Bigfoot a real creature and yet a spiritual creature at the same time that can come and go as he pleases. So
I've heard that.
Yeah.
And
And
that parallels, you're right, that does parallel the supernatural.
mhm,
There's no doubt about that. So I didn't read much into it, but when I heard that, and look, I'm not going to discredit because I haven't read about it. I will read about it. But when I heard that, it opened up doorways for people, like almost like a scapegoat for them to say, well, that's why.
right.
So then that eliminates, so again, for Bigfoot, that eliminates it as a biological thing. It puts it into the realm of paranormal.
Right. But what's so strange about that is, they do, I mean, they leave footprints. If you believe, all the footprints that have been gathered,
Right.
and there are samples that they've gotten of hair and stuff that don't match DNA wise. So yeah, it's really strange.
It is.
The whole thing is
And
is again fascinating. Like, we go back to that magic thing, the man behind the curtain, and we just love that whole thing.
yeah, and it's the appeal of the mystery. For ghosts, what videos or any, like, is there any video or photos you've seen that are you find compelling?
I'll go through, YouTube all the time and look for them. I love the one like you were talking about. The gentleman, he lives in the Northeast somewhere, and there's a black entity
How
that.
do I find that guy? I want to get him on the podcast. I gotta
Yeah,
find
you
that guy.
should.
Because
Yeah.
the fear he expressed transferred to me. You know what I mean? Because when you see a grown man terrified, something
Mhm.
inside you, your primal self is like, oh my God, if it scaring that dude, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'm a
Yep.
pretty rough guy in real life, so I don't know. Like that,
Yeah.
I gotta find out who that was. But
Yep.
I have to.
Yep. That's yeah, he would be amazing probably to interview, because his stuff just seems so genuine, like you say, his experience and the way he reacts to it. And there's definitely ones that you see, there's some videos you see, and they kind of ring a bell, and things don't quite match up right.
Right.
And but there are a lot out there where you're like, I watch it 3 or 4 times, and I still don't know. I hate to call out somebody and say, oh, that's a fake, or that's not a fake, or whatever.
I just
But
turned it off.
yeah. So, but there's definitely a lot out there. I know that on my bucket list, I would love to go to Scotland and northern England, and look at all the castles, and do all of that stuff, because they've got a lot of videos from there as well.
Yeah,
So
and it's interesting on top of which, right? It's history.
right, it is, and there's a long history there. So I know I read a story a long time ago, of a guy. He's in his basement in England, or in northern England, and all of a sudden, in front of him, a column of Roman soldiers walks out of one wall and through the other wall, and right in front of him. And then later he finds out that part of the house used to be, a crossing for the ancient Roman legion that was in charge of the northern area. Anyway, I love history, and I love all of
Yeah,
the
a lot of
the
people
stuff
died
that
there
goes in.
too, by the way, on and instant. That's something I've spoken to some of the afterlife people.
Hmm.
They died instantly and not in a pleasant way.
Right,
So their reason for not crossing to wherever it is there should be going is because it was they weren't ready. And for me, like I'm a nostalgic person. I'm not going to let go very easily. You know what I mean?
right,
So you can only
exactly.
imagine for those people that they had families at home and they died instantly. They're like, well, I'm not ready. So I mean,
Right.
I make room for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reason why you have so many battlefields in particular that seem to be haunted. Gettysburg is a good example of that. You've got young men in the prime of their life dying in horrible fashion, and it's got to be shocking to the soul, I guess. You could put it that way. And
Yeah.
uh, so,
Gettysburg's on my list, by the way, because there's a few videos I saw where I couldn't explain any kind of hoax. That's me though. I'm not a professional,
right,
but
right.
I'm a pretty logical person, and
Hmm.
some of those videos, I definitely have to go because I'm compelled to because the reaction of I always go to the reaction. I could tell there was an adrenaline dump. You can tell by the shake, the pitch, the change in the pitch in the voice, and the other people's reactions. I'm one of those few rare people that walk to the problem, right?
Right. Yep.
I'm the guy that dies in every movie because I just got to know. So, but
Yeah.
the majority of people, they run because it's terrifying, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you're not expecting it, it can be so jarring. I
Yeah.
know for people that I've interviewed who were just expecting a regular day, and all of a sudden they're face to face with the paranormal. It's frightening because not only is it something scary, but it plays with your senses. It's something that you never thought that actually existed, and now you're face to face with it. It's frightening for people.
I guess for me, like even if it were just a ghost, a demon could walk in right now, and act like an asshole, and I feel great because that's now I know when I die, it's not for nothing. I go someplace, right? Thank you for showing
Right,
up, and now I got to
right.
exercise you out of here. You know what I mean? So.
See, that's a good point too. And a lot of people look for that because of not just the fact that we have to go somewhere. We hope we go somewhere when we die,
Right.
but when you lose a loved one too, there's this sense of you want to make sure they're okay and that they
Yeah.
went somewhere.
Plus,
you know,
it's who you are. Like you spent, decades here on Earth establishing who oneself is.
mhm.
You have people you care about. For me, it's like, again, nostalgia plays a role. You love things about the past, and you revisit it often, or going for walks and seeing. So there's things that we're very attached to that we wanted to have purpose. And then when we pass over, is it possible that we could still revisit it, or wherever it may be? I've heard some interesting takes on the afterlife about personalized heaven, how you'll view things. Look, if heaven's personalized, I'm in great shape.
Yeah.
If I'm a ghost, I'm going to haunt some very weird places, probably Hooters or otherwise. So
Yeah. Well, and I just barely found, and I don't have on me the name of this book, but there was a doctor who was a hospice doctor. He's been a hospice doctor for 25 some odd years, and he wrote a book about it. And he mentions that like the very first day he was ever on, or the first week he was ever on hospice, there was a young boy that was dying of cancer. And he said, he gathered the people together, and he says, I think I'm going to put him on, more saline, and I'm going to get him this and this. And I think we can, hold him off from death for another month. And the nurse, one of the old nurses that had been there for a long time, she looked at him and she says, his grandma's been visiting him the last 2 days. So I don't believe he's going to last the night. And he's looked at her funny. He goes, what does that, his grandma have to do with it? And she goes, his grandma's dead. And he's told me several times she's come to visit him the last 2 days. And that's one of the last signs before you pass. And he looked at her and he was really snotty. He said, I don't remember reading that in the Journal of Medicine.
right.
And she looked at him and she goes, you're going to learn a lot of things that aren't in books by being a hospice doctor. And sure enough, this boy passed that night. But that was one of the things that he talked about, is that and hospice nurses and hospice doctors will say, people will say that they've been communicating with people that have passed, and that's one of the last signs before, they end up passing themselves. And I find that fascinating as well, because that's part of the paranormal world too, and it's a very real part that people deal with. So
Yeah, I recently read something too about sleep, and when you're in deep sleep, and I forget who it is. It was like a shaman, I think. And he said it's like the closest to death you're going to experience while alive.
yeah.
And it's
Yep.
because your mind and the energy of your mind's in a different plane than what you are currently, which explains dreams and really vivid dreams.
Hmm.
Um, and then I hear that a lot too, where people are seeing their loved ones, prior to, and it makes me wonder what the connection is between, per se, a fantasy dream versus what your brain's allowing you to see.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll share one experience that I had.
Sure.
Um, when I was in my 20s, my grandmother had passed away, and she's in Denmark. My mother is from Europe and from Denmark, and I never got to go to my grandma's funeral, and never got to say goodbye. And at the time, I was married and had my oldest was just a toddler. And on Saturday mornings, my wife, who I was married to at the time, was a beautician. So Saturday mornings, she got up early to go do updos for weddings, and I would lay in bed and wait for the baby to wake up. And she had left, and I was laying there half asleep, half awake, and there was a knock at the door, and I said, "Come in." And my grandma came in, and she sat on the bed, and we had a conversation. And I remember, and she'd asked about the kids and how my mother was doing. And I remember I looked at her and I said, "Grandma, you passed away." And she smiled and she said, "That doesn't mean I can't come visit you from time to time." And she got up and she walked out and shut the door. And then I came fully awake. And I've had a lot of people that have said, "Oh, that's just your mind trying to put a bow, tie up the end of, your grandma passing and not being able to say goodbye and everything like that." And I don't have to prove anything to anybody, but I really believe that my grandma came to talk to me and say goodbye, which again, I was in sleep but not sleep mode. And so, and like I say, I don't have to prove that to anybody, because it's for me. It was for me. It's kind of
Yeah,
a thing for me. And so
make room for this idea. Your sleeping is meditation,
hmm
right? It's the same thing. When you're asleep and then you're in deep meditation, it's the same brainwave, same idea. Now factor in people with head injuries like myself who develop special abilities, right? There's a report of a guy who started playing piano or violin, whatever it was, after a massive head injury.
right.
Listen, the brain is powerful. And the receptor of your brain, and I say this a lot too, your brain is your computer. And the receptor of your brain, we don't even tap into its full abilities. I'm not going to say we use 10% of it. I think that's disproven, but we use portions of the brain, not all of it simultaneously. But in a sleep state, you don't know you could release your full. You understand, in your dreams, you are creating whole worlds with individual people, scenarios, dialogue, picture perfect, might I add, in your dream. So how
Right.
powerful is the brain? Think about that. If you sit here right now and you imagine in your head, you're going to fantasize about something, you'll get some images, but when you're in dream state, it's amazing what you could see. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you don't, the where your brain is at sleep, if your grandma visited, that's the opportunity that your brain's at full capacity and she can visit.
Right.
By all means, I make
Exactly.
room for that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Yep.
There's people that meditate just for the ability to reach out to something, whether it be an alien, ghost, or whatever. And there's reports of them they come back positive. Some people meditate to heal, or some people like myself used to use meditation to gain focus, to focus, when you're going to go out and compete.
Yeah.
So you can't discount your brain, especially in your sleep state. That's when it's most powerful because it's subconscious. So whatever's happening there, it's using its capability, not yours.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes right along too with those who've had near death experiences, and when I say, when I talk about the paranormal, I don't exclude anything when I'm interviewing people. And it's just the whole world. What we know or what we think we know is such a small amount of what is actually out there. It's just fascinating to me. I love it, and I love talking about it, as you
Yeah,
can tell.
it's a great subject. And listen, I say this a lot for whether it be a scientist, skeptic, or someone who doesn't know or full believers, we don't know everything. We're not going to know everything ever. We could have a machine tomorrow that could see a ghost, right?
Right.
And then there's going to be that next thing we don't understand, because then what do we? Let's say you start seeing a ghost, you're talking, and then the ghost's like, "Well, I'm seeing shit. I don't know what it is." And how do you explain that now, right? So that could go forever, right? In the meantime, enjoy the mystery, enjoy the challenge of it.
Oh yeah, and like you say, I mean, it's exciting and it's fun, and there's some of us like you and like me, we've we love it enough that you do a podcast, I interview people, I write their stories, and especially this time of year when you're getting around Halloween, there's a lot more people that are excited about it. But it's fascinating, and there's so many aspects to the paranormal, like you say, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, glitches in the matrix, near-death experiences. It just goes on and on. And like you say, we're never going to know it all, but we sure do try.
We really do. It's a shame for skeptical people. I say this a lot. Are you skeptical because in other words, why do you need a reason to call someone bullshit, right? Why do you need that?
Exactly.
What's broken in your life that you have to do it? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Or what if a ghost shows up? Does it undo everything you believe? You melt? It's so weird to be that way.
Yeah. Yep. I remember at one point, my oldest son and my youngest son, and there's 8 years difference between the two of them. And my youngest son asked me a question about magic because he'd watched a magic show. And my oldest turned to him and said, "There is no such thing as real magic." And I looked at my oldest, and he looked at me, and I said, "How sad of a world do you live in to not believe that there isn't magic?" And he just kind of scoffed about it. But I'm like, even, at 46, I want to believe in, some sort of magic out there.
Of course.
And there is magic out there, and it might not be Harry Potter magic. That's not what I'm talking about. But there's amazing things even in everyday stuff that can happen to you. And some people will call it luck, and some people don't believe in coincidences. I happen to not believe in coincidences. I think things happen for a reason for you, especially throughout your life. But that's what I'm talking about. There's paranormal, there's magic all around us. It's just going out and finding it.
Right. And it's, keep in mind, and I say this to people a lot, you can't belittle people. I had a friend at the pool hall, and he was always, and look, he's one of those people, like the flat earth thing. He's like, "Oh, the world's flat." And I didn't discredit him or try to dump on him. He just nodded, like, "Okay, man." It's like, because to say this to people, if you know someone's really crazy, why are you going to argue with them?
Yeah, that's one of my wife's favorite sayings is, "Who's crazier, the crazy person or the person who argues with the crazy person?"
Yeah, so. It's not just walking at a wall. You're getting a full start run into the wall and hoping it moves. It's crazy talk.
Right. And that's like, I say one of the things that I say, you never argue about politics or religion, because it's just fruitless. You're not going to change anybody's mind because they're set in their ways, but you should listen to what they have to say and find commonality. And then, it just makes for a nicer world that way, honestly.
Yeah. Like, look, when I get out in the road and I start doing this doc, I'm going to reach out to people like yourself, and I'm going to introduce you to Dawn and Lainey they're on Spectra Waves. They have a YouTube channel.
Oh, awesome.
I really like those two.
Yeah.
And like, she's the type that she'll walk in any dark place. She walks into places I won't walk into. And I'm a pretty brave person. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yep.
It's people like that. I need that network. So when I get out there and look, you know what I mean? I have a general idea. Because as of right now, if I start doing all this research in Florida, I'll be here the rest of my life. This place is crazy, so.
Exactly. Yep. And that's what I tell people. People are like, because I live in Utah, and they're like, well, because of the Skinwalker Ranch and everything, they're like, isn't that a paranormal hotspot? And I say, yes, but I find that like a lot of places are paranormal hotspots because there's a lot of stories and stuff in all different places. So for sure.
That's going to be, I don't know. A lot of people are approaching me. Are you going to go to Skinwalker? I don't know. I'll tell you why I don't know. A billionaire is there with all the resources in the world. I'm going to go there with a camera and see something. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
I share one thing in common with the billionaire. We both wanted to see it badly. And if he was denied, I have no shot. So.
Yeah, he's got a lot of, a lot of resources, and they're still not struggling, but they're, they see stuff and then they have no idea, all this money and all this equipment, and they still see something, and they can prove that they saw it, but other than that, they don't have,
it's not well documented, and that's the problem, right? And, again, back to that, it's mystery, because, again, if you introduce ghosts to the world tomorrow, let's say you go out to Starbucks and it's common that they're hanging around, it's not interesting anymore. You know what I mean? So
right, exactly.
It's reaffirming, and probably, I think it would help us drop some of the tension of race and differences between us, because if a spirit's like, look, man, over here, that shit doesn't matter. Because then over here is like, well, why does it matter here? Right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
Could very well be a life lesson that could be, helpful, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, John, before we close, I want to get your opinion on one other thing. And then thereafter, we'll close for the evening. What's your opinion on reincarnation?
Oh, that is a good one. I've been watching a lot of information about that, and it's amazing how many younger kids, usually kids that before the age of 5, will talk about the other house I lived in, or when I was married, and it fascinates me how these kids know things. I watched a whole thing on YouTube, I believe it was, about kids that were born that talk about dying in 9/11. And
oh yeah, I did see part of that.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, obviously, but also it seems like there's something there. Somehow they're getting that information. And so from the background of which I was raised, I was taught that was not necessarily, that's not a thing, but there sure is a lot of information out there about it. I find it, like a lot of things, just fascinating. I don't have an answer, but I know there's something to it just because of the experiences that these kids have shared. And it does seem to disappear by the time they're 5 or 6. They can't remember it anymore for some reason, but I just like everything else in the paranormal, I love researching it and learning as much as I can.
Yeah. There's a kid that talks about World War II as a pilot, and his story was so detailed. And mind you, some of the stuff he spoke about was, Department of Defense, I think it was. So the kid couldn't possibly, you can't just look it up.
Right.
And in the era he was discussing this was like the 80s, where he should, it wasn't like today where there's some internet. So you had to open a book, and this kid's like, I think 6 or something like that. That one landed for me, because that's pretty compelling stuff. And it turned out the pilot was real, where he died. The kid said he died was like on point, So there's little stories like that they give me a little hope in that realm.
Yeah, you just, who knows? But like you say, it gives you hope that there's definitely something on the other side, which we all hope for. So.
Well,
definitely.
John, before we part, one last thing. The guy with the video I'm talking about that we discussed earlier, I'm going to look for him, see if you can find him. If you do, email me, because I got to find that guy. I got to talk to him.
You bet.
Anyway, John, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad you came on. We had a great conversation. We're definitely going to do it again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. You have a good night, John.
Thanks, you too.